Good morning and a very warm welcome to CropTec 2016. This is Adama's third year as title sponsor of the CropTec event, and as such it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to what is once again set to be a very useful and informative couple of days. This year's event is focused on providing you with the latest technical knowledge and agronomic advice to enable you to continue to improve yield and optimise inputs in arable crops. With the UK's future outside the EU still to be determined, there's arguably an even stronger need to drive for outright yield and careful cost management in production. I'd like to spend a few minutes trying to outline what the next few years might have in store for the UK arable sector. I can't pretend to have a crystal ball clearer than the next man's. However, I hope to provoke some interesting debate during your time here at Peterborough. No matter what technique we use to prepare seed beds, how well we manage to establish new crops, or how much money we spend on nutrition and crop protection, one thing, the weather, is always out of our control. And yet it is the one factor which can make or break a crop, and is, it can be argued, the biggest factor in determining final crop yields. The 2016 harvest season was no exception, and a prime example of how the weather can completely change a crop's potential. Despite what was largely a very favourable season in terms of temperature and rainfall levels, the yields of many of the main arable crops were lower by some margin than in the previous season. This year, Adama took an even keener interest than usual in final yields, thanks to our involvement with the Yield Enhancement Network, or YEN for short. We sponsored a select group of 5 arable farmers, working with them on all aspects of their crops development, from drilling through to harvest, which included discussions on pest and disease pressures to crop protection and nutrition strategies. At each stage during the season, each of our sponsored growers felt confident they'd given their yen crops the opportunity to attain the best potential yields from their selected fields. But at the end of harvest, it was apparent that a lack of solar radiation during June had caused many crops to stall. The latest Met Office figures suggest that solar radiation was as much as 50% lower than typical for that time of year. In real terms, this caused average wheat yields to fall by over 10%, from 9 tonnes a hectare in 2015 to less than 8 tonnes in 2016. Winter barley and oilseed rape crops followed a similar pattern. Barley yields fell from an average of 6.8 tonnes to 5.9 tonnes, while oilseed rape was down from an average of 3.9 to 3.1 tonnes last season. These earlier maturing crops having less opportunity to recover from the inclement early summer. Another area that we have little control over is the UK's exit from the European Union. Thursday, 23rd of June, will go down as a historic event and significant turning point in the UK's political history. What we know at this stage is that Article 50 will be triggered in March 2017, and that, as a result, the UK will leave the EU no later than the 1st of April 2019. Or do we, based on recent discussions in the High Court? Nevertheless, the government could have as little as 2 years to negotiate our exit and to draft a new British agricultural policy. Let's refer to it as BAP and hope it's not too hard. What the new agricultural support scheme will look like under that new policy is anyone's guess. But it's important to remember that while the UK is a large importer of food, it's also an important global exporter and a valued trading partner for many countries outside the EU. As we wait for the fog of confusion surrounding Brexit to lift, we can look at examples from other countries to see if we can find some clarity. It seems unlikely that a BAP would be as generous to farmers as CAP. However, we can look towards New Zealand as to how lower subsidies have been managed. Growers there went through a similar process when production subsidies were removed. The first 5 years without support payments saw arable yields drop, which undoubtedly caused a great deal of pain within the industry. However, another 5 years on and average yields recovered well, and they were in fact much ahead of their historic levels. Admittedly, those yields started from a relatively low base, but what the removal of support payments clearly did was to force the industry to increase efficiency, stop farming unproductive land, and to focus on new market opportunities. Theirs was hopefully more severe a process than we could face here. New Zealand now has the highest average yield of any major wheat producer at 9.1 tonnes a hectare. The UK ranks 5th. An exceptional 2015 season narrowly enabled the UK to wrestle back world production records. It's worth remembering that whilst the UK's likely exit from the EU might seem daunting given the number of unknowns, we will by no means be unique within Western Europe. Norway and Switzerland, for example, remain outside the EU but are amongst the highest payers in terms of agricultural support. What it boils down to, it would seem, is how coordinated and determined we are as an industry in lobbying the policymakers. We will really have to punch above our weight to achieve this. The UK GDP is a whopping $2.8 trillion, and that's 5th globally and the 9th biggest exporter. However, the UK is globally the 8th least economically dependent on agriculture, with the sector contributing just 1% to our GDP. Agricultural workforce comprises only 1.2% of the working population. Our subsector, arable, is estimated to contribute just 1/3 to agricultural GDP. The government has weightier vote-winning priorities such as the NHS, finance and aerospace sectors to consider, with the NHS alone receiving a pre-referendum indication of an extra £100 million a week. We have much to do and must manage ourselves well. However, it's very good to see Nick van Westenholz joining the NFU as the head of Brexit negotiations. But, and it's a big but, UK agriculture could find itself in a favourable position. There are huge markets outside the EU for us to tap into, not least the increasing areas of Asia and Africa, where sustained population growth is creating serious demand for imported food. Over 5 billion people are expected to be living in Asia and 2 billion in Africa by 2050. In contrast to the EU, stable at a mere 400 million. Locally, the UK population is also expected to grow to more than 75 million, so our domestic market also remains positive. Despite my earlier comments about how a poor month can compromise an entire crop's yielding potential, the UK still remains in the top 10 in terms of global cereal yields. We really are very good at growing wheat and have scope to do even better. In addition, we are highly skilled at growing malting barley, potatoes and sugar beet, giving us the opportunity to be globally competitive, especially with the current strength of sterling. We are also served by a well-positioned network of deep export ports, the likes of which many other EU countries are exceptionally jealous. To increase yields and to develop further as a truly global food producer, we will need to win the battle against a number of key crop threats, most notably blackgrass and septoria in wheat, as well as a whole host of other difficult-to-control weeds and diseases. The short-term future for new chemistries and novel modes of action looks relatively sparse, thanks largely to the raising of regulatory hurdles and the need for companies to carefully manage global research and development budgets. With a shortage of new products coming through and existing chemistries always at risk from regulatory restrictions, farmers and agronomists must ensure that they formulate treatment programs which do not place undue pressure on those actives which are already at risk. Spray programmes must also be designed to prevent an increase in the number and rate of reported resistance incidences. ALS and azole resistance are already hampering the efficacy of a number of key crop protectant actives, and unless we act now, these chemistries are likely to become ineffective in a relatively short time. It's essential to use the whole crop protection toolkit, including strong multi-site solutions, such as the fungicides Manitoba, Arizona and Scotia, to give added protection to super active curative products. We must also be very aware of the implications that ongoing cases of water pollution will have on future crop protection armouries. If we do not tighten up current practices, tomorrow's farms will be left with a very limited number of crop protection options. That's why we at Adama are actively promoting a number of important stewardship programmes, including Metazoclor Matters, Get Pelletwise, as well as our own Water Aware initiative. Additionally, we're working hard behind the scenes to create novel formulations which will make existing actives efficient for longer. As resistance levels rise and regulatory pressures increase, the focus must shift even more towards an integrated management approach, with spring cropping, rotation and cultivation techniques all playing an equally important role. It is these various elements that I hope you will be able to learn more about here at CropTec. Whatever the challenges facing your farming enterprise, I'm confident you'll find the next day or two useful in terms of finding some valuable answers to the questions you're facing. And as someone so wisely said to me just a few weeks ago, whatever the next 12 months or the next decade brings, it will be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. Thank you. Enjoy the show.